Welcome to week 6, halfway point, session 1, all about readers. We're going to be talking about why we ask people to read, what people we will be asking to read, the who, when do we want them to read our novel, at what point, and how. How is it all going to work? What are the logistics? You know I have some answers for you, right? The first question, why? Why do we need readers? Why is Gina suggesting that? 3 reasons. One, objectivity. You have been immersed in the soup, deeply in this process, in this journey, in the content of your book. You need some objectivity. You need some space. You need some distance. Whoo, clear your head. And you don't know what the reading experience is because you haven't had it. You have written this book and you have read it, but you're not reading for pleasure per se. You're not a casual reader. You are reading for the purpose of crafting the story. So you don't have that objectivity. So that's reason number one. That's why you need to get other people to look at it and tell you what's what, because you've been like this, and I can't see anything. I mean, I can see this, okay, but I can't see this, and this is where you've been with your novel. Two, books are for reading. So you want to find out how this story, how this world that you've created is landing on the hearts, minds, and spirits of readers. What is, in fact, the reading experience of your novel? Like I said, you don't know that. You know what the writing experience is, but you don't have the objectivity. You are not a casual reader. You have been reading for different reasons and in a very different way. So you need to know, the second reason you want to go to readers is that you need to know what the actual reading experience is for your novel. And that's very exciting. It's an exciting part of the process. Three, part of keeping this process fun, of having a ball writing our first novel, is working in a way that keeps our energy high, keeps our motivation high in ways that don't overwhelm us, in ways where we are not overly focused on logic and linearity, and we're just going by the seat of our pants. We're enjoying it, but we're also uh, creating um, a blueprint, if you will, an outline, so we don't get lost in the weeds while we're having fun, meandering, taking adventures. We're honoring our rhythms. We're writing in ways that are comfortable for our bodies physically. We're taking breaks. We're not at the computer, for 12 consistent hours without eating and resting and going to the bathroom. So if you so here, using the metaphor of the funnel, we began last week, week 5, at the neck of the funnel. So as you move down the funnel in particulate, all right, before you get to here, the end, the last 2 words on the last page of your novel, you want to know what the reading experience is. You want to know if this plot is believable. Again, we're not talking about realistic because this is a fictional world, but within the context of the world that you've created, do readers believe it? Are they on board? Do they buy it? How are readers relating to your characters? Uh, how are they relating to how characters are evolving, what we call a character arc? If you get readers for the first time at this part of the funnel, the end, what are you going to have, 300 pages or so? and you ask 3 to 5 people to read it for you, and they give you feedback that suggests you might want to take uh, a very different turn at one point in your plot. Now you're looking at 300 pages of needing to rework this or consider or play with the idea. Doesn't mean you have to accept reader feedback, all reader feedback, and we'll talk about accepting feedback. But if you want to try it on, it's a new idea. If you want to experiment and play with it, you've got 300 pages and 32 chapters to wade through. Whereas if you go to readers here at the top of the funnel, there's enough, you know enough of the story and you can share enough of the story so that they know, they get a sense of where you're headed, okay? But you haven't invested particulate energy, which, as you know, in the soup, requires that you nap and you take rest because you're focused. You're really immersed in this trance known as your novel. If you get feedback that says you might want to consider this, you might want to consider regrouping. I had a reader tell me she didn't believe uh, the to use her words, the Machiavellian nature of one of my main characters. And I was like, oh, because that was a serious plot thread. Well, you know what? Good to know that at chapter 8, not chapter 28, because it does affect the trajectory of the story. So, this is why those are the 3 reasons you want to go to readers: objectivity, you want an objective, an opinion about, number 2, the reading experience, and you want to do this in a way that, should you need to make changes, and you will, we don't know what they are yet, but readers are going to tell you something, you're going to go, yeah. And if the same readers tell you the same thing, you're going to go, yeah, I need to make some changes. So if you want to keep it fun, it's a lot easier to make changes when you've gotten feedback at chapter 8, and it's enough for people to know where you're headed, whereas getting feedback on the whole of the novel, and then you go, oh my God, that's so overwhelming, and then you put it in a drawer and you go, I can't do this, goodbye. Who do we ask to read our novel? Do they have to be authors? No. In fact, I suggest that don't, that they're not authors, that they're not writers. If you happen to have friends and family members who are writers, that's fine. Readers who are writers needn't be eliminated, but I don't want you to feel that you have to seek that out. We're looking for people who will writers will read for fun because writers read books for fun, as casual readers, but writers tend not to read casually. And what you want is really just sort of a layperson casual reading experience, and feedback on that. So it can be anyone. All right, these are the criteria. You want it to be a person who reads. Not everybody reads books. I actually have known people in my life who don't read books, and that's what it is. So if people are not in the habit of reading, they don't have the reading experience, they're not the best people to give you feedback about the reading experience of your novel. So these are people who read. And then I would say people who like to read fiction, because I also have people in my life who are voracious nonfiction readers, and they don't give one whit about novels. So they're going to kind of be trudging through your book, and they might do it because you asked them to, but no. So you want people who read, and yeah, 2 thumbs up. You want people who read and who like to read fiction because you want them to be excited about reading your novel. Two, these people are thoughtful people. I don't mean intellectual necessarily. I don't. We don't want them actually intellectualizing and overanalyzing. They don't need to be super educated. In fact, it's probably helpful if they don't have PhDs and master degrees. You don't, this is not a dissertation. You're not looking for a grade. You just want somebody to read your book and just say, hey, I like this character. This character didn't work for me. Oh, it was really fun when this happened. Just a pedestrian reading experience. But they're thoughtful, meaning when they give you feedback, well, A, they are going to give you feedback. That's what you want. They're not going to say, it was good. I loved it. Good for you. All nice things. Useful? No, if I'm being honest. So thoughtful means, like my friend Sophia, who gave me the prompt for this book, we were on page two, chapter one. I had given this woman 9 chapters to read. We're on page two, chapter one. And she asked me a question. I answer the question, and she says, no. I said, what do you mean no? No, I don't buy it. I said, what don't you buy? And this is when she got into this, when I explained to her how this main character was pulling these strings, she was like, no, 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 no. Nobody can be. I don't believe she was saying that he could be that Machiavellian. That's just not. And uh, so you want someone to be thoughtful and have uh, an opinion. These are people who have opinions, all right? Three, you want to choose people who are able to provide you with feedback constructively. Part of that is just really looking at their personalities because if somebody tends to be really hardcore and just go, in how they, if they tend to be very abrasive and hardcore in how they generally interact with the world and with you, chances are that is not going to change, you know, to any large degree when they're giving you feedback on your novel. It's not, it's who they are and that's fine. And I have people in my life like that and those relationships are important to me. At the same time, there are certain things that I don't share with those people because they can be very intense and abrasive. And in the same way, we want to minimize until we're ready to access our left brain, analytical brain, so that it doesn't kill the sensitive, delicate embryonic work. We want to ask people to read who are capable of saying, what works? Wow, this really works for me. I love the description of the Brooklyn neighborhood. I love how when she ran into, the guy at the store, it was so quirky. I like the pacing of it. What wasn't working for me is that I didn't believe that this character was so Machiavellian, and I didn't believe that why were they lavishing all this attention on her? That didn't really make sense because and so you want someone who can tell you what works and what doesn't work from the perspective of a casual reading experience. Because people have that all the time. When you go on Amazon and there'll be a Pulitzer Prize winning book, and there'll be 3,000 people who loved it, and there'll be 1,000 people who hated it, and there'll be 2,000 people in between. The reading experience is very subjective. So you want to, and that gets to how many people, and I'm going to get to that in a second, but you want it to be constructive because you want whoever it is that's giving you feedback to take care. Um, you want it to be honest, you want them to have an opinion, you want them to be thoughtful, you want them to be um, uh, vocal when they share their opinion, but you want them to do it constructively with care. The point is not to disembowel you. Who? We're still talking about who. The fourth, in terms of who, we really get into numbers. And I would say, based on my experience with 9 books, um, if this is your first book ever, more readers than fewer. If this is not your first book, but it's your first novel, uh, I'd still go with more than less. Here's the number. I'm going to say minimum, minimum of 3, maximum 5. So we'll say 3 to 5. Ideally, you're looking on the higher end, 5, because, as I said, using the Amazon reference, it's subjective. So you want to get enough of a reader sample so that when the feedback starts coming in, if you can get a sense of patterns of feedback, if 4 out of 5 people tell you the same thing, whatever that same thing is, it's fair to believe it. Okay. If 1 out of 5 people says this was amazing, it made me cry, and then the 4 other people say, I didn't believe this, you want to kind of check back with your own instinct and say, did I believe it when I wrote it? Because sometimes you'll have that experience. You'll be writing something and you go, oh, I don't really believe it, but you're capable of creating the fantasy, so you keep going. But there's this little part that doesn't really believe it. So the readers kind of, the numbers will kind of tell you what you might want to accept or not accept in terms of feedback. And they also are great barometers for your own instinct. You're like, yeah, when I was writing that didn't work for me either, but I didn't really know how to address it, so I kept going. So basically, the criteria for your readers, they read fiction, all right? They're thoughtful. They're people who are opinionated, but they can, 3, do so in constructive ways, not ways that will make you want to put your novel in a drawer and never pick it up again. 4, you want to ask 5 readers. If this is not your first book, 3 will be fine, because you have enough of that and sort of internal confidence that, I mean, when your stuff's not really working. But in the early part of my career, when I wrote my first 2, 3 books, I had as many as 20 readers. That was probably over the top. But I really did. I had no idea how my writing was going to land on readers. I didn't have a sense of that. Now, after 9 books, obviously, I have a sense of readership and how people respond to things that I write. So you're looking, let's talk anywhere from 3 to 5 people. And the reason why we do that, number 5, is in terms of who, is it's a small enough number so that it doesn't get unwieldy. Okay, because you don't want to be sifting through 20 different versions of your manuscript when the feedback comes, or however, I sat down with my friend Sophia. That's how she likes to give feedback. She made notes in the manuscript, and we sat down at her kitchen table, and that's fine too. You're not trying to turn this into an administrative project. You want the feedback so that you can use it, make whatever changes you're going to make, and keep going, okay, in that direction. Uh, but I'm gonna curtail it there, and then we'll talk about accepting feedback later. When? Now. Basically, this is week 6. By the end of this week, you want to be able to hand up to between 6 and 10 of the first chapters of your novel. Basically, the first third. Because next week, you need to take a rest. You've been in the soup, you've been working and intensely and with intention. and you need to take a rest. You need to just back off and have some objectivity. So, but what's important here is that that doesn't mean nothing's happening. What's happening is you got readers reading your book. Okay, so now so there's stuff happening that's very productive, and it's not anything you have to do. You did your part. You give it to them. Okay, and you can go on to other things, and we'll talk about that next week. I call that in the meantime. So uh, when is if you've been using the iterative process that I talked about last week in week 5. You know, you read it, going through chapter 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you're going to the work and you're moving things around and you're beginning to shape and refine that hunk of clay that you chunked and plunked from your sandbox into your chapters. And you work on chapter, and while you're working on chapters 8, 9, 10, 11, chapters 1 through 7 are baking. And then while you're working on 12, 13, 14, 15 chapters, 11 through 10 through 14 are baking. So you're working on that iteratively. And the mini bake is, again, it's that objectivity. A big part of this process too is the what I call the negative space. It doesn't mean nothing's happening. A lot is happening, as we have learned in the earlier weeks of this process. When it appears as though you're doing nothing on your book, you're driving, you're walking, you're cycling, you're playing with clay, uh, you're you're waiting on the line at the post office. The boys in the basement. I love that reference. The boys in the basement are working. All right. So you need to, so that bake time, that objectivity time is so important, because that's the only way you are going to be able to continue working at this particulate a level. You can't work down here with sentences and words and paragraphs, and does it all in your left brain is, does this make sense within the context of the world that I've created? Your left brain is now carving away and trying to, attempting to organize what your right brain was just having a ball, plunking in there. You can't work at that level and not take a break. Well, let me rephrase that. You can, but A, you burn out. B, if you don't, even if you don't burn out to the extent where you literally are just so mentally and physically exhausted, you you can't see your book clearly. You can't see what it doesn't serve. It not only does it not serve you, but it doesn't serve your book. So hopefully you've noticed that when you are cycling through your chapters, and while chapters 10 through 15 are baking because you're working intently on 16 through 23, then when you go back to chapter 10, you're like, oh, you keep carving. There are things that you can see at this iteration that you couldn't see in the previous iteration, and that will continue to happen. So stepping away from the manuscript, giving yourself that bake time is really important. So what you want to do is you want to get no more than 10 chapters, minimum of 6. Why? Because a minimum of 6 chapters will tell your readers enough about the book. It will be enough information: who your main characters are, where the book is set, what some of the complications might be. The first third of your book is really the setup, so you haven't really got into what the problem is, what the conflicts are, because that's what makes for there's a problem that needs to be resolved, and that's the middle of the book. And then at the end of the book, it's resolved, and then different people go their different ways. Some live, some don't, some whatever. Okay, so what you're giving them really is the setup. So the setup gives them enough of the who, what, when, where, why. Okay, or the who, what, when, where. Maybe the why and how that comes later, but it gives them enough of the world so that they can give you some feedback. With only 6 chapters, my friend Sophia was able to tell me very clearly what was and what wasn't working. All right. So that is what you are spending this week doing. Now, if you started this iterative process last week, this should not feel daunting, overwhelming. This is not a tall order. You're pretty much ready to go. You might want to go back over those first 10 chapters and get them as continue to shave and get them as elegant as you can at this stage. And what you're looking to get elegant is the flow and the plot. We still haven't gotten into language, where I'm going to talk about that in sessions this week. But that's the other thing you want to tell your readers. There's going to be some readers who want to, sit there with a red pen and tell you that this word is misspelled, or there's a typo here, or they want to start editing your sentences. We call that line editing. No, because that stuff might wind up on the cutting room floor. All right. You want to know in broad strokes, is this readable? Do they believe this world that you've created? What do they think about these characters? That's really what you're looking for at this point. Line editing, waste of your time, waste of their time, and if they're wasting their time, they're also wasting your time, because that sentence that they edited is probably going to go away. Okay, so that's the when. Today is Monday, October 20th. This week, sometime this week, and I actually encourage you not to wait to the end of the week. Identify your readers, get your minimum of 6, maximum of 10 chapters to them. And here's the other thing: you don't have to get them all at once. Let's say you have 5 people, and you got chapters 1 and 2. Get those chapters, first 2 chapters, to those 5 people. All right. While they're reading chapters 1 and 2, you can continue to polish and shape chapters 3, 4, and 5. And you give them that. While they're reading that, you keep that. That's exactly how I did it with my friend Sophia. I didn't give her all 10 chapters at once. I gave her I gave her the first 6 chapters, and then I gave her a chapter at a time up to chapter 10. And then when she got to chapter 8, that's when we sat down and had the conversation, and she said no, and I was like, I stopped writing, because I realized that I was going to need to make some shifts. Okay, so that is the when. Okay, the when is this week, and you are getting chapped. And I talked a little bit about the how, and I will finish the how in the next slide. I already started talking a little bit about how in the when section of this video. How, the logistics. First of all, I recommend that you provide hard copies to your readers. Your readers do not have to live across the street. They can be anywhere in the country, in your country, whatever country that happens to be. I recommend in your country only because if you're going to go by post and not email, and I'll explain why in a minute, it takes longer to go overseas. So if you have friends overseas, whatever sea that happens to be, based on whatever country that you're in, uh, I recommend that they not be your readers. Have readers in your own country. Using my country, the United States, as an example, I have readers in different parts of the country. I have readers locally in Florida. I have 2 in Georgia, and there's another person who I haven't asked yet, and that's probably why I can't remember. But the point is, they don't have to be across the street, all right? But it's important just for timing purposes that they're in the same country. With my friend Sophia, she's a 20-minute drive away. So first of all, I mailed her the chapters, and then when she had gotten through them and she was ready to give me feedback, that's when she called me and said, come over, let's get together and we'll talk. So that's more of the how. Uh, yeah, that's more of the how. You might be saying snail mail, and why not email? Well, there's a couple reasons for this, and it really uh, the first reason is that you want the reading experience of your novel in draft, in progress, to be as close to the reading experience of your novel as finished. And so that's going to be held in hand. Now, I understand people read on digital readers. I have a digital reader and I also still read on paper, but the point is it's still going to be held in hand. And so if you email it to somebody and they just open it up, they might just be tempted to sit there and read it on the screen, because I do read fairly heavily on the screen as well. Um, that's a different kind of reading experience. You really want them to have it in hand. Secondly, um, if someone, 10 pages of your novel, I mean, we're talking about, potentially like, 80, we're talking about 80 to 100 pages or so. To ask somebody to use up their very expensive toner ink to print that off is really stretching, it's stretching the favor of them reading for you, because that they're investing time and they believe in you, and so don't ask them to use their ink. Three, you do this for protection of your own work. I am in no way suggesting that the people who whom you have asked to read for you will steal your work. I am saying from experience, I am two things. Early on, when I asked people, before I wrote my first book, and I was asking people just to read different things that I wrote, I found, interestingly enough, that people that I asked would then share it with people that I didn't even know. Like a friend would come over for dinner and they'd say, "Oh, read this." My friend sent me this. Or their neighbor, they'd see their neighbor across the street and they were cleaning out the garage. "Oh, read this." And so, my writing was going to all these people that I didn't know, that I didn't ask. And at the time, I wasn't okay with that. I'm still not okay with that, but I wasn't okay with it for a different reason. That time, I had not come out of the closet, if you will, as a writer, and so it was, uh, it took a lot for me to show my writing to people, and it was, I chose people that I trusted. So I didn't want these strange people that I didn't know, making comments about my writing. And uh, people would, the people that I sent it to would say, "Oh, my neighbor so and so thought." And I'm like, "Well, I don't know who your neighbor is, and I don't care what they thought." It's at this point, it's like, "What did you thought?" So subsequently, I started saying to people, "For your eyes only." I mean, it's great if people are reading your work and they're excited and they want to share it. But at this point, again, it's still embryonic, and you really want to say, "For your eyes only." The last reason uh, is that people do steal work. How do I know this? Because I have been in a position where my work has been stolen. And unfortunately, I had to get some lawyers to help me with that. Uh, So if your work is going, so it's a lot. If your work is going through the digital space, email, you don't know where it's going. Okay. It's a lot harder to share stuff. And again, I'm not saying the people that you're asking to read would betray your trust in this way. But if somebody gets very excited and they go, "Oh, my friend, look at this. This is fun." And they just start emailing and pasting and tweeting on it and cutting and pasting the whatever you call it, the social media networks or whatever. It's harder to share your work um, on a whim when it's in hard copy. You don't Once you send it to email, you don't know where that email is going, and so that's why those are the four reasons that I encourage you to send it in snail mail. I will be doing a session on protecting your work, because before you send it out, I highly recommend that you copyright your work with the Library of Congress. Um, and I will put the link to that, I have copyrighted every single thing that I've written, and I have, that I've published, and I also do that in process. So what's important here is that your novel does not have to be finished for you to copyright it. In fact, I encourage that you copyright it now while it's in process. You do not have, whatever it is you've got, doesn't have to be, the copyright office is not looking for spelling and punctuation and grammar. You just want to have on record sooner rather than later with the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., your book. And again, I'll just send you the link and the LOC link, Library of Congress, and like many government websites in the United States, it's a little kludgy, as my geek friends would say. Kludgy means not very elegant, but I'm sending you to the link to the page that will get you started. Just kind of, if you can move through that process, it's probably going to take you about an hour the first time because you just have to kind of read it and figure it out. But protect your work before you send it out because you don't know where it's going. Okay. So that's it for session 1, readers. So get those chapters ready, chapter 6 through 10. See you session 2 of week 6.